Hello friends, this is Growl. This video will kick off a mini-series, I guess, of audio commentaries I'm doing from our MDI Global Finals. I was thinking about doing some from the Cup as well, but we'll just do these ones since they're more recent and more fresh on my mind. I think you guys will enjoy these as well. I can give you guys a little bit of insight on what was going through our head and some of the strategies and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that you may not have initially noticed while watching these. If you haven't watched our games, I would highly recommend checking them out as well. It was very, very fun to do all this. It took a lot of work and we were happy with how our team did. So let's jump right in. This is Sanguine Depths 21, Tyrannical, Necrotic, Spiteful. This first pull is a little scary because our next pull is completely maniacal and we need to save as much as we can for it. So you can see my cooldowns in the top left. I'm using almost nothing. I can't use anything. The sole purpose of this pull really is just to get some of these mobs to get the count and to drag everything into our next pull, which, spoiler if you haven't seen this, does not go well. This is the Clown Fiesta match of the tournament for sure for us. While it was certainly an interesting one to play, this was our very first match of the global finals and it was super nerve-wracking. To put it into perspective, I guess we can talk a little bit about the matchup. I guess I already started the key, but this was versus team name. I would say both of our teams were considered some of the lower seeds of the tournament. You had, Titans like Echo and Perplexed and Aster Y coming from China that were all favorites to win. We were both on, we were on that side of the bracket where no one really cared about us and no one knew what was going on. And our only goal really was to, if we could just win a match, or put up some good games or, anything. We didn't really come in with like, oh, this is just our first round or whatever. Like, all these guys are crazy players too. And it may not seem so that we're all crazy when you watch what happens in this key, but this was one of the maps that we practiced the most. I would say this is, while our route was incredibly difficult, it was also one of the routes where we were most comfortable. We put in lots of very, very good runs. We were a little bit faster than them, and also Lapon used his meta there, which is, I guess I'm not going to talk too much about the other team just because I don't know what was going through them. But so now you can see our pull here. We pull the Brute and all of these ticks and into the first boss with the Incinerator. And this is almost completely maniacal, but if we manage to live, it's a very, very good. So a few things about this pull. Beforehand, this morning, the morning of this match and the night before, we were actually struggling a little bit with this. We had thought we had hammered it out. We got it to be pretty consistent, but we were struggling a little bit with it. And yeah, things weren't going well for us, and we were pretty nervous that this pull wasn't going to go well. Am I on the highest quality here? Yeah, I guess this is the best we can do. So this pull goes wrong, spoilers. So first thing that happens is Yoda is assigned to sort of like typhoon some of the mobs to help group them up, but it looks like not all of them were hit and they're starting to get their spell casts off. Dorky grips them all together into the beam, but while Dorky has to do all this, he also has to grab the boss in here. And now if you saw what happened, the boss ran at Cryptix because Cryptix is, doing damage. He's a mage with bloodlust and stuff, and the boss actually just one-shots Cryptix. So in the panic here, now we start to realize like, oh no, like we need to grab the boss, and not having the Frost Mage is really, really dangerous for us because all these mobs live. So even though Cryptix didn't die, he's in this pod and he's not doing any damage. So while he's doing 67k DPS from his blizzards and his orbs that are already out, he would be doing a lot more DPS. So now Dorky's in trouble. Dorky has 40 something stacks of necrotic. His only real reset was to use his Kyrian file, and he knows that the trash is going to live very long because our mage potted. So he's trying to milk out his file as long as possible. Unfortunately, it goes a little bit too soon and he manages to die. You can see here I have my Ashen down. I haven't used wings. Part of the way that I set this pull up is that I'm spamming holy power while we're running in trying to get procs. So I have procs for most of the pull here. So immediately my first thought here when Dorky dies is we need to res him. And I realized that it's probably like I'm not going to be the best person to res, although maybe that was incorrect. And do I res? Okay, so I think what happens, oh yeah, because silly me, sorry, I'm not used to playing with a Moonkin as much, but yeah, so my thought process here is I'm not the one to res. That's going to be Yoda's job. I need to keep the boss away and keep Yoda alive. So the first thing I do is I bubble myself and I taunt the boss away from Yoda so that Yoda can buy enough time to res. This is still a miserable spot for us because Dorky has to get threat on all these mobs and everyone's doing 50k DPS. So Dorky is just like trying to get threat on whatever he can, but the mobs are just running everywhere. We do have some ability, but keep in mind it's also bursting. And so, for example, Junkrat is playing Dwarf, Cryptix is playing Dwarf, although they do have like a Vanish and, you know, they have ways to drop threat, and Yoda is Night Elf, I believe. But unfortunately, all this trash is still living, and we aren't able to live through it, just barely. These brutes are blasting us, and we end up going down because of the how poor the setup was of the pull. And this is rough because this is one of the biggest time losses you could possibly have. Not only do we have to reset this boss, but all of the high health mobs, all of those brutes were still alive. And also we lost our 10 stacks of the urn. When this happens in a match, you basically just assume that you lost, and we're on about maybe like a 3-minute stream delay or 2-minute stream delay. I don't know, I wasn't watching, but I was just relaying to from what my team said. But when you're in the match, you just have to keep going. You never know what happens. This is where things get really bad. So we're like, well, we have no cooldowns, we have none of the lanterns, we just have to continue on. So luckily the incinerator was almost dead. We can get the incinerator power, but we don't have the lanterns. Yoda also doesn't have his Ravenous Frenzy. Dorky doesn't have his meta, and these were very, very critical for us in doing these pulls. And also we don't have the battle res. So Dorky is kind of, he doesn't know, right? We're like, well, can we pull the boss here? We don't know if we can pull the boss. Like, is this fine? Is 2 brutes and the boss on a 21 on necrotic fine? Like, we don't know. This isn't anything we practice. So we're just like, well, let's just work on the brutes. And then we're just thinking like, man, this feels so bad. Like, we just need to go. Like, we can't, you know, we can't just sit here and do 2 mobs in an MDI. Like, this is disrespectful to our opponents if we think this is a good strategy. So we just end up pulling the boss, and the brutes are just absolutely blasting us. Dorky has some means of getting rid of his necrotic. I think he just got rid of some there, but he has no meta, he has no cheat. Slowly the necrotic builds up, but keep in mind also I have no way to heal, right? And Dorky just dies. Dorky just dies. Like, we were just so dry. We used literally everything we had on the last pull, and he dies and we have no battle res, and we're just like, oh my god, we lost. Like, this is our first match of the MDI and we just lost. But I mean, obviously, right, you're in the match, there's no go again, there's no anything, so we're just like, well, what do we do? So we kill the brutes off, since we know we need to reset the boss to res. We finish off the brutes and we finish off the spites. I start my res. Everyone's like, you know, getting their food buff or getting ready or whatever, and this is brutal. At this point, we're looking over and hoping that they wiped at the boss pull like us, but they didn't, and they're continuing on, and we're just like, you know, oh my gosh, we're in so much trouble. We are so dead. We can probably fast forward a little bit through this boss. This was one of the most grueling bosses, so it might not seem crazy, but you know, being 7 minutes in, like, this is slower than a live key. Like, we just did a 27 sanguine on live tyrannical, and this is slower. Like, we are just so far behind at this point. I mean, we just send whatever we have, right? At this point, none of us know. Like, you're trained to know exactly which cooldowns you need, like when your Ashen comes up, when your meta comes up, all that stuff, and we have no idea. We have no idea, like, what cooldowns are what. A lot of people gave Yoda flack for not having his Incarn. You know, not using it or holding on to it too long, but realistically, like, we have no idea, you know, we have no idea how this goes. So then we start looking over and we're seeing that the other team is having some problems. The other team is having some deaths. You can see that they're feasting, right? They know they're ahead and they're like, guys, don't worry. Like, even though we're having some problems, just don't worry, just stay, you know, they're so far behind. I can only imagine that's similar to their comms. And at this point, we're just like, well, we just have to go with the same route that we have planned. So this next pull is essentially like the next 4 packs all together. It's really strong because you have these little sprite mobs and you can get them into the lantern quickly to get these 10 stacks to get the damage and healing buff. And then that way we can power through this with no cooldowns. And I'm starting to get my cooldowns lined up okay to what they would be. Normally I would wings this at the very end, and I would Ashen Wings the boss on pull. And so my wings is running out, but it's like sort of close. I'd imagine that most of our team is like sort of getting synced together. Like we're like, okay, well, our route's pretty fast. Like they made some mistakes too. We can, you know, we can do this. Like we weren't totally out of it. We weren't totally, like we definitely thought that we effing lost. So this next pull is probably the scariest pull of, maybe not the whole dungeon. It was either the first boss pull or this pull, but this pull is really damn scary. But we practiced this as well. So one big thing here is I bubble and I stand in with Dorky, and that way we don't get feared and I can just sort of like stay in. I'll also taunt Varuth if I need to. And Dorky is getting blasted. This is a really tough pull for Dorky. I don't know what exactly happens here, but something really bad happens and Dorky goes down again. And now, again, our tank is down. We're trying to extend the lantern that we had with the next one, but at least we didn't open it. We didn't open the next lantern. So now we're basically like, we lost. Like there's absolutely no coming back. When this happened, we're like, this is where we're questioning all existence at this point. Like we have no idea what's happening. So Junkrat vanishes and someone else vanishes, but Junkrat has no way of rezzing, and like we just have to wait for Yoda, and like Cryptic's just, I don't even know what happens. Like everything, like Junkrat's like coming back here, like trying to sap mobs, like seeing what's happening. Dorky doesn't have an invis spot, but he has to run through and shadow meld, and like we were basically like, we lost. Like we were like, there's absolutely no way we come back. This was like the lowest I think our spirits probably were the entire tournament or anything that happened. We were just like, we completely lost. We don't even have a battle res. It's not even like Junkrat can battle res me and res everyone up, because we don't have a battle res. So we're literally just standing here waiting for Yoda. Our whole team is just standing here. You see Junkrat like running back and forth. I don't even know what's happening. Like I don't even know where Yoda is. I don't, like we're like, we had basically just completely given up at this point. We're like, we don't even know like what, I don't even remember what was going through our comms, but I just remember that this was over. But we're like, well, we're in the match, right? Like we're not giving up. So you see me, I like put a marker down on the floor to like show where my body is, so like Junkrat can res. Like I'm mass resing. We just like drop a food buff because it's just like, well, we lost. Like, you know, let's not die any more than we have to and look too stupid. But we still have these 2 lanterns, and we're like, well, we can just do the rest of our route. Like the other team's probably, you know, they're probably done soon. We'll be over. So we just like pull the remainder of mobs with this pull, and then we look over and we're like, wait a second, they have the same amount of deaths as us. Wait a second, what is happening on their end? And we look over and we see, and now granted we're on like a 2-minute delay or whatever, right? So we're just like, we're doing this pull. I think it's not quite when we're doing this pull, but again, right, look at our health. Like everything is just going, like every single pull is just terrifying. We should have 10 stacks of the buff for this pull, but we have 0. And everything is just going terribly. Like we can still do this pull, but it's just slow. Dorky's getting blasted, I'm getting blasted. And the important thing too is that the boss is the next pull after this. So this is another pull where we don't want to use any big cooldowns. We don't want to have to use anything because we know that the boss is going to be next with the stacks of the lanterns. So we don't want to waste anything. We want to be able to use it then. So we're clearing this pull out, and this is where we start to realize, like, we're looking at the other side and we're like, wait, like they died. Like, wait, what? We're like doing some math. We're like doing some math in our head, and we're like, we're not that far behind. Like at just a second ago, it felt like we lost. We're like, wait, we can actually win. We can actually win this. And this is part of our strategy here, where we get 10 stacks of the lantern and we decide to just run it into the second boss. So we're slowly building up our stacks. You know, again, everyone's saving cooldowns really, really hard. And we have a strategy where Yoda waits back at that lantern and sort of like roots or whatever, and then manages the very last stack so we get an extend like right here. So this is our next pull. This is essentially everything with the boss. And I believe this gets scary too. This is like very tough area denial. There's just swirlies everywhere, beams everywhere, but we also have infinite damage. Once we have that 10 stack of the lantern, we don't even know when to bloodlust or when to use our cooldowns. Like, we have no idea what the timers are at this point. Everything is so different from our practice, but all we know is we're gonna blast. So we're just like, maybe we can still win. Like, let's just keep blasting. Things go a little south here. I get pretty unlucky in that I think I bubbled earlier and then I get targeted by Castigate after, or maybe twice in a row, and I wasn't able to lay on hands myself, but I somehow managed to pull everything. I know Yoda comes in sometimes and heals, but yeah, we essentially just deleted this boss. We instantly deleted this boss. We've had faster though, and we're able to extend into this next lantern, as you'll see in a later match. So we're at 64% now, and we're pulling everything else that we need on the floor into the very last lantern. So our plan is essentially take that first lantern, the one that we just did, and take it into the second boss. Then if we need to, rebuild all the stacks on this lantern, and then as soon as we can, as soon as this lantern's done, we're just gonna run downstairs to the third boss and just fight the third boss with the lantern. Because having those bosses take so long, and if we can get a huge damage buff with our cooldowns on the bosses, it makes a big difference. So here we are, we're blasting, and we're watching the stream, and we're seeing on our other monitor like what's going on, and we're like, wait a second, we killed the second boss before them. I remember Yoda says this, like during this pull, or like maybe after the pull, Yoda says, we're ahead of them on the second boss. And we're just like, what? No way. There's no way we're ahead of them on the second boss. We should be done with the dungeon by now. Like, we should be like, even with a bad run, we should be done with the dungeon by now with how our practice is going. Our goal time for this dungeon was 13 minutes about. And so we were at 16 minutes, and we're like, this is not even, like, you can't even call this a bad run. This is just the astronomical worst possible thing that could happen to us. And Yoda's like, we're ahead of them on the second boss, and we're just like, wait, we can still win. Like, that's basically our thought, like, this whole time. We're just like, wait, we can still win. So we pull everything to this guy, and this pull is pretty easy too, mainly just because we have that 50% damage buff. By now, all of our cooldowns are pretty well together. We have Dorky's meta, my wings, Junkrat will cloak, and Cryptix will block the first one, and we just like blow these up. It's really important these mobs die because of all these spells that go out, all these dots and the silences and stuff. You can see I even might try and dip in and like use a blinding light or a Hajj or something just to, like, you know, try and stem the cast as they die. But it's really, really important that all this stuff dies as quickly as possible. So yeah, at this point we're winning. I still didn't quite believe it. You know, again, I expected them to be done with the dungeon by now, but they had some similar scuffs to us. You know, I'm not going to go back and, you know, obviously we all did lots of stuff wrong. I'm not going to go back and, you know, this is mainly for talking about what we did in the match. You can skip ahead a little bit here. So we skip all this stuff. Normally there's some pretty easy count that you can get if you're doing a live keep, but it just isn't worth the time. Like in an MDI setting with how big that you pull, it's not really worth the time to do that little stuff. And so one thing you notice, we actually do the gauntlet, like this part, very, very slowly. It might seem, but it actually is a pretty fast way to do it. So first of all, we're only doing one pack at a time because we want to have those mobs alive, because they help out the damage of our teammates. They help out frost mage damage to the boss and rogues damage to the boss, so it's almost like funnel or, you know, power that we're keeping these mobs. So even though we could probably run all the way down the hallway and grab everything and nuke it down at once, it's actually faster for us to kill, you know, because then we'll be left with a boss, right? We'll be left with a boss that'll have a bunch of health and like no way to do a lot of damage. So we're just chugging through the hallway here. Another development that's happened is normally in pugs you'll see right here you open the lantern and get those stacks, but we wait a little bit. And we also, well, okay, so actually we do open the lantern here, but it's only because we can do this part really fast. So our goal here is to clear the entire rest of the hallway within the span that the lantern is open. And if the lantern is like, we're going to just keep fighting here and pull as much stuff into the lantern as we can. And then as soon as the lantern is over, we're just going to grab literally everything all the way till the end of the dungeon and just pull it into the boss. So we're on a timer at this point. Dorky runs ahead and like fears those guys, and we just basically go as far ahead as we can and pull as many mobs as we can in to get them out of the way, so that we don't have to have them in for like the last boss, and so we can phase the boss. So we still need to extend the lantern. We need a mob to die in that lantern at the end of the timer, so that's why we have to drag everything back. We could maybe do something to try and make it a little bit more smooth, but as soon as we get even just like one mob that dies in there and extends it, we're good. So I think we do that. I hope we manage it. Yeah, so there we just got our extend, and now we're just going to finish off the boss. As soon as the boss is phased, and now the boss is at 70 and the last boss will be active, we're just going to book it. We're just going to book it all the way to the last boss. Because the main reason is because we have Bloodlust and we have that 10 stack again. We just want to blow literally everything we can on the boss. We can actually wait just a little bit here. There's a little bit of like a roleplay thing that goes on with the last boss, so it's not active right away. So we can kind of like get our bearings for just a second real quick. But then now you see, as soon as the boss is here, we're all just going to run in. And again, this might seem scary, but with Bloodlust, a potion, Ashen Hollow with the 10 stack, I'm just doing literally infinite healing. Like, you'll see, it looks scary when you look at the screen, but then you look at our health bars and like look at how fast the health bars just go up. Like, anytime anyone dips low, that Ashen Hollow is just taking them for like, you know, a zillion health. And now with all that stuff, you see how fast this boss melts. And yeah, so we ended up winning. Even though we were 22 minutes in, which was 9 minutes slower than our expected time, we ended up winning. And this, I think, this is a really big mental relief. Like, even though in theory we could have still won the match, even if we didn't lose this, if we lost this, it put us in a very bad situation where we're very scared to make mistakes, you know? Like, when you're not on elimination, you can just play your game, and if mistakes happen, mistakes happen. But once it's imprinted into your brain that as soon as you make a mistake, it's just over, like your whole run for your team is over because of you, it's a lot harder to play well. So winning this game, I think, was like this massive weight off of our shoulders. And on top of that, they must have been tilted out of their minds too. Like, I can only imagine losing to a team that had a 22 Sanguine Depths. Like, it could have been either of us, right? It's not just us that it happened to. It could have been either of us have been tilted. But yeah, so that was a very big mental relief. And I think what could have been a very, very tilting result ended up going not too bad for us. Jumping ahead a little bit. So when you see this screen, if you're ever watching the broadcast live, this is like all of us are sitting in the dungeon and we're waiting on the admins to sort anything out. And so, like, you know, when your whole team gets into the dungeon and then your mage is like, hold on guys, I got some tendies in the oven, I gotta go get them. You know, that's basically what this is right here. When even though it's the MDI Global Finals, it still doesn't excuse your teammates from just going AFK even though you're waiting to start the key. So the longer you see this screen on, the longer it's taking the team. You don't want to blame the admins at all. Generally, it's just always the team's faults, which is whatever. You know, it's a hard game. But I don't want to watch that part. Okay, so here we go. So now the default comp that everyone was playing was this Hunter, Windwalker, Prot Warrior team, and this is not what we wanted to do. We felt more comfortable with Moonkin, and also we thought Hunter sucked and Mage was amazing, so we decided to play this comp. Our idea was we didn't want to hold, we wanted to use Venthyr Moonkin Incarn on the first boss, but we were too fast. Like the Moonkin needed to hold his cooldowns all the way to the first boss, so we thought, how do we make the beginning slower? So we decided to just do this pull, and we're just like, okay, Yoda, you just blast everything on this pull, and that way you can get a use out of your Incarn. Junkrat and Cryptix, because their Mage and Rogue do good damage anyway, even without cooldowns, so we just blast that pull out of the way. It seems a little wonky, and it's not what most teams did, but it was actually very smart that our team came up with that, just because it made better use of cooldowns. And now you'll see we're doing this pull where it's only 2 bow breakers and this incinerator. This is so hard. This whole part is so hard. Keep in mind, this is a 23 fort bursting key, and this is just so hard. We were trying to do everything, like all the guys in front with these guys, and it just felt like it wasn't worth it. Especially considering we didn't have a Windwalker. Like the AoE damage from the Windwalker, I think would carry this pull. If you look on their side, you know, their Windwalker's doing 27k DPS or whatever. And because we didn't have that Tiger that we could blow on this pull, we sort of had to make an adjustment. So even though we had the smart, you know, effective Incarn use at the beginning, we weren't able to do all this trash here, which was a little bit annoying. But our thought was that we think Moonkin and Mage is better for everything else. So as long as we can get out of the first boss with a decent time, you know, comparable to the other teams, then it's not too bad. A nice tip here is that these mushrooms, if you eat them, it full heals you. And you can't use that too often in pugs, but keep in mind you don't always just want to rush to get the green mushrooms. So what some of our teammates do is they wait to get their mushroom until that moment when everyone's low, and then they'll just eat and you can even eat multiple of them like pretty quickly. So you can just like eat a purple one to get full health, and then if you dip low again, you can just eat your... And that's the reason that we were tanking all this stuff in that room too. So if this was the match I'm thinking of, something crazy happens with this mob. You can't see it, but this mob actually pulls. So Dorky somehow manages to pull this mob, and we're freaking out. You see Junkrat? We're all like, whoa, what is going on here? We all just are completely frozen, just like stopped, because Dorky pulled this mob, and it's so bad for us to fight that pack. And so we're just like waiting, and like eventually Dorky shadow melds, and we're like, okay, we're good. Like that's one of those things where you don't really notice that it happens in the broadcast, but I mean, it was like a, you know, 5 to 10 second loss, and the mobs are just like, you know, game bugs. I'm not like blaming anyone for that or saying it was someone's fault. Like sometimes stuff just happens. So now all of our cooldowns are coming close to back up. We have Shadow Blades and Incarn and stuff. So I actually can Ashen this. It just felt like using Ashen on that Bowbreaker pull was better. However, I am running Seraphim in this key. I wasn't running it in the last key, I think, but I decided to run it here just for that extra damage. And you'll see my damage is actually like pretty good. Not to flame, but we'll look at Igloo's damage and we'll compare it to mine, and I think honestly it was a lot of that Seraphim diff. So now we actually phased the boss at like almost the identical time, so we're ahead on count because of that Moonkin, and now we're catching back up, right? And this is the Venthyr Moonkin diff, right? Where, hold on, let's go back. We gotta look at the numbers. So you see on the boss, Yoda's doing 62k DPS to the boss. He's absolutely blasting it. And then if you notice my damage too, I'm doing 15.6k when the Vuln ends, whereas Igloo is doing not 15.6k. They do pretty well, right? They do actually they get it really low. So part of the reason that this happens is they actually stalled longer. So let me rewind a little bit, just to like, you know, fully to show you guys exactly what's going on. So we're blasting the tree, right? Normally in a pug, you just blast the tree and you just get the tree just so you can get the Vuln phase as fast as possible. But what they're doing is they're milking this out way longer. So see that when we phase, like our Droman is lower, but their Ingra is lower because they're doing more damage to Ingra because they want to use their 1 minute cooldowns on pull and on the Vuln phase. So it's like, it seems like our teams killed the boss at the same time, but because we were able to focus the tree the whole time, we actually like had a much faster first boss, because they pulled the first boss sooner, but then we were able to kill the first boss sooner, which I guess partly is explains why my DPS was higher than Igloo's. Like if Igloo has to sit through in that beginning phase a lot longer, then his DPS is going to be lower. So that doesn't explain everything. So in the MDI, the maze is random, but it matches for both teams. And during practice, we kind of got an idea for the maze and figured out, like, we got a schema of how we thought it was fast doing it. And I kind of got a handle of like when I use my cooldowns. But the ideal situation is that we actually don't pull Varuth here. Varuth with this pack can be really, really scary, especially considering we all just blew our load on the boss right before this, so we don't really have that much damage to use. So we decide to pull Varuth with the next pack, and then that enables me to use Ashen on it. It's a little bit sloppy with my cooldowns, because you'll see that I'll have Ashen, but I won't have wings. And I just sort of have to suck it up at that point. It's kind of not great to use Ashen without wings, but, you know, what else do you do? We're just going... Well, like, we had a very good first boss that was very clean, so it's fine, you know? Like, sometimes your cooldowns are messed up because you're going so fast. So now we pull this in. I drop my Ashen. It's a little tough on Dorky, but we're trying to manage to stop the Stalkers and blow up Varuth. And there's not a whole lot to say about the maze. One thing to note is there's a set number of paths in the maze, and you can actually, like, if you really wanted to be nerdy, technically memorize every path. And I tried to do my best. I have some notes on it too, of which paths are which. And so I sort of have an idea of the path. You'll see I'll use these big red markers to sort of guide my team to show. And I think, if I remember, I was pretty confident in this run. Whatever path we ended up getting was one that we sort of like knew what to do in practice. I'll mostly skip through the maze because I don't think it's particularly interesting. A big thing to note is just there's a lot of mobs that do stuff. You know, the Stinger you have to dispel, the Stalker you want to interrupt, the Guardians you want to interrupt, the Shapers you want to interrupt. Like, there's all just different things, and so a lot of it just comes down to having assignments of who does what. And in a pug, it isn't a big deal because you're pulling only one pack at a time, but since we're pulling two, so you can see that we already know what the maze is just because of the path that we've gotten. I know there is a weak aura that sort of does it, but it can get buggy if you're pulling stuff like, you know, in weird orders. It's like, it's essentially built off of how much count you have in the maze. And when you're pulling stuff in weird orders, the weak aura can break. So that's why we're kind of doing it. I don't know if manually is the right word, but that's why we're doing it the way that we're doing it. I want to say this frog kills me. I'm almost positive at some point I die to a frog. I don't know if it was just in a dream that I had last night or what, but I want to say this frog kills me in one of these matches. I don't remember this match that specifically. I know we played pretty well. I was pretty happy with how we played, but yeah, the frog with this pack can be a little bit scary. A lot of people ask about how you pull stuff through the walls. It's very situational. So the easiest way to do it is if you have a hunter. That's why you see all the teams play hunter, is because you literally just tell your pet to attack a pack that's behind a wall, and your pet will just run through it because the walls are, like, you know, semi-solid or whatever. And we're doing a way that's slightly harder, where our Moonkin uses trees, and then the trees run at the mobs and then sort of pulls it in the same way that pets do. There's also some other ways, like there's some trinkets and like some ground effects, and just know that, like, it's very specific, but the short of it is you need a pet. Like, you want to have a pet that just like runs in and pulls stuff. Yeah, we're running ahead. For some reason, these tenders in the maze are really, really buggy. We tried to pull this pack in, but for some reason, this one tender didn't come. This actually happened to us versus Echo. It may have even happened to both of us, if I remember. I don't know why exactly it happens, but I'm just having to solo the tender. Miss is not the most exciting dungeon. Oh yeah, so here we go. We're going into boss. Again, this pack is reasonable to pull into boss. It's a little annoying, but it's sort of like, you know, free. Our goal-ish for percentage that we want to be at this point was 65, if I remember. 65 was like the lowest we could get while still being like still doing our normal route. If we end up any lower than 65, then we'd have to do some weird stuff. Maybe like a little bit lower, it wasn't that bad, but basically 65 is our sweet spot. And I think with this pack, it ends up being perfectly there. And now my Ashen comes up again. We send it. This stuff is all pretty easy. You know, all the hard to heal stuff was sort of in the beginning of the dungeon. And now once there's one more pull. Actually, the next couple pulls are a little challenging too, but all this maze stuff is pretty easy. There's a lot of theory craft and talk about skipping the last phase of the Mistcaller, and you'll see us attempt it here. I don't remember specifically if we got it, but so you'll see the idea at least. And I saw some other teams copying us here too, so it's not like we're really revealing anything. So our idea is just to kill the boss before it gets its very last guessing game off. So around, like, depending, we sort of like feel it out, but essentially during this intermission here, Yoda starts his Incarn, I believe, and starts his like Omega Ravenous Frenzy ramp. Maybe not yet. I don't know. I'm not sure the exact timing yet. So you can see he just presses Rav and Incarn right there, basically at the end of the intermission. And we kind of mathed it out with our team's DPS. That is the spot just about that you want to press it in order to try and phase. Your results may differ depending on your group comp or whatever, but so the goal here is to get it so the ramp is ending right at about 10%. I don't remember exactly what happens, but looks like things don't go well for us. We only get it to 3%, which was unfortunate. And it can be a little bit of a time loss, but at the same time, it's like more or less fine. It's not the end of the world if it happens. So that's the only one that we've found that we could reliably skip. It's possible that you can skip the other ones if it has to do with the way the boss spell queues its abilities. Essentially, you like need the boss to mess up its spell queue, and then it'll skip it, but it's not reliable. I haven't seen any teams been able to skip all of them. You know, skipping one is good enough. So there's a patrol of birds all the way over here that Junkrat needs to stop. And so what we do here is Junkrat and Cryptix go off to the side because it's very slightly faster this way. Junkrat is slow falled, and then he flies all the way. Now see these two birds right here? You'll see what he does. He shadow steps down, and then he stops these two birds. He uses sap or distract or whatever just to make sure that right exactly where we want all these mobs to group up. And now the rest of our team comes in, and Dorky comes in and groups everything. And you see how like super mega efficiently we are able to gather all these mobs. We need to focus down the casters first because we're kind of limited on the amount of kicks, but this is where I think Dorky did an insanely good job compared to most of the other tanks in the competition in the way that he structured this pull and the way he was able, like, this was really tough because, as I've mentioned a couple times before already in this commentary, this is a pull where I'd like to say that the next pull is hard. And whenever you have a pull where the next pull is hard, like this pull ends up being hard because everyone's saving their cooldowns, right? It's even a phenomenon that happens in normal keys. It's not necessarily only an MDI thing. And so the next pull is going to be 2 packs with the boss, with the Soggadon increased physical and the Koros, the Cold Heart increased slow, which can be very, very dangerous. And on top of that, remember this is bursting. So none of the other pulls has bursting mattered that much, but because I just have absolutely no juice, bursting can be scary here. And I believe I make the decision to bubble here. I was thinking that we're doing okay in the run, but our team is hurting really bad. And although I don't want to bubble here and I want to save it for the last boss, I made the safety decision to bubble just because, well, like, I think if we made it through this pull, we'd be okay. So things get really, really close. At this point, I need to be prioritizing Dorky because Dorky just wants to run ahead and set up the next pull as soon as possible. We shroud here just to make grouping a little bit easier. The whole rest of our team is just staying in stealth until, well, Junkrat can hit stuff and use tricks, but for the most part, the rest of our team is just staying in stealth and trying not to mess up the way the mobs are grouped. This pull is one of the more terrifying pulls for me. I was especially terrified because I'd used my bubble early. So the idea behind this pull is that everyone is slowed, but at the same time there is just an absolute bombardment of these swirlies, and getting hit by any of them is almost always immediate death. And if I drop Ashen and then die, it's a huge tragedy. So I'm being very, very careful here to just move as soon as I can if there's ever a swirly. You can see there, I get one on me and I somehow managed to barely get out of it, but that's normally a situation where I would just bubble for safety so I wouldn't have to worry about risking it. But you have very, very limited time to react to those big green swirlies from the trash that we're pulling in. Luckily, we made it through. And then this is probably the last like tough part, is these mobs dying. Now my Ashen Hollow's gone and my Wings is gone and we're getting this bursting in, and you know there's lots of dodging to do, but essentially this is like live bursting win. And so now you can see I've expended basically every single button I have. We used our dwarfs, I used my Wings, my lay on hands, I have no bubble, like this is just everything. But so all the way up until here we were pretty confident at this point that we had won the match. I didn't talk that much about how the other team was doing, but we were confident that if we pulled off our strategy and did everything pretty cleanly that we'd be able to win. So we were kind of watching them on the side and we knew that we were ahead a little bit. I didn't know their plan, if they wanted to pull more trash onto boss here or if they were just going to do a double or a triple or something after, but the way that you can see that the big place that we save the most time is the way that we optimize sort of the end, in the way that we had the pulls structured and the way Dorky grouped everything, and you know well, we actually needed like one more count or something. That part of the math of the 65 is that we can go into that pack and kill like one larva real quick if we need to, just for a couple extra count. So that's it. That is the first round of the tournament. A little bit of a different thing. It wasn't necessarily like a live first person view commentary, but I thought some people would be interested in our MDI adventures. So let me know what you thought of that video, if you want me to continue the series and do some of the other matches that we had. Hopefully ones that'll be a little bit more educational, although I guess this is more entertaining than it is educational. But either way, thanks for watching, friends, and happy keying.